Right, we now come to the next statement, but before we start, can I just say to the Home Secretary, the statement didn't arrive in my office, it was late. I believe it was also late to the opposition, and quite rightly, you made a big thing of it as Shadow Home Secretary, so I'm just reminding you of your words back that we do need to get on time. This second time so far, and I know it won't happen again, it will be taken on board. I now call the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank you for standing up for the opposition front benches, as I know you have done so very often for me in the past, and apologise to the Shadow Home Secretary for a delay in the statement. Mr. Speaker, most people in the UK want to see strong border security with a properly controlled and managed asylum system where our country does its bit to, alongside others, to help those who have fled persecution, but where rules are properly respected and enforced, so those with no right to be here are swiftly removed. At the moment, we have none of those things. Border security is being undermined by criminal smuggler gangs, and the asylum system is in chaos. 19 lives have been tragically lost in the Channel so far this year, including children. No one should be making these perilous small boat journeys. Criminal gangs have been allowed to take hold along our border, and they are making huge profit from undermining our border security and putting lives at risk. They should not be able to get away with it. Crossings in the first half of 2024 are up by 10% on last year, numbers going up instead of coming down, and at the same time, the asylum backlog is getting worse as decision-making in the Home Office has dropped. And a Home Office spending on asylum support has increased sevenfold in the space of just 3 years. This cannot go on. So since my appointment 2 weeks ago, I have reviewed the policies, programmes and legislation that we have inherited from our predecessors, and I have been shocked by what I have found. Not only are there already serious problems, but on current policies, the chaos and costs will likely get worse. First, on our border security. It's clear that the security and enforcement arrangements we've inherited are too weak. Criminal gang networks are operating with impunity along our border, across the continent and beyond, and across the UK too. Action along the Channel between Britain and France has improved and is preventing some boat crossings. The work of the Small Boats Operational Command in the Channel is important and will continue. But we need to go much further. We should be taking far more action upstream long before the boats ever reach the French coast. Cooperation with Europol and other European police forces and prosecutors is far too limited, and enforcement against exploitation and trafficking in the UK is far too weak. Information sharing with our European neighbours has reduced rather than increased. And as a result of these weak arrangements, I am extremely concerned that high levels of dangerous crossings we have inherited are likely to persist through the summer. Mr. Speaker, let me return to the Rwanda Migration and Economic Development Partnership. So 2.5 years after the previous government launched it, I can report it has already cost the British taxpayer £700 million in order to send just 4 volunteers. Those costs include £290 million payments to Rwanda, chartering flights that never took off, detaining hundreds of people and then releasing them, and paying for more than 1,000 civil servants to work on the scheme. A scheme to send 4 people. It is the most shocking waste of taxpayers' money I have ever seen. Looking forward, the costs are set to get worse. Even if the scheme had ever got going, it's clear it would only cover a minority of arrivals. Yet a substantial portion of future costs were fixed costs. For example, the annual direct payments to Rwanda, the contracts for escorts, the staffing in the Home Office, the detention and reception centres and more. So the taxpayer would still have to pay out no matter how few people were relocated. And most shocking of all, over the 6 years of the Migration and Economic Development Partnership forecast, the previous government had planned to spend over £10 billion of taxpayers' money on the scheme. They did not tell Parliament that. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Rwandan government for working with the UK in good faith, because the failure for this policy lies with the previous UK government. It has been a costly con, and the taxpayer has had to pay the price. Let me turn now to the Illegal Migration Act. This law has been in place for a year. We were told it would stop the boats. That has clearly failed. The legal contradictions in the Act are so great they make it unworkable. Indeed, 12 months on, the central duty has not even been enacted. It is also costing the taxpayer billions of pounds. Under Section 9 of the Act, people who arrive can claim asylum and get asylum accommodation. But under Section 30, if they arrive after March 2023 and meet key conditions in the Act, no decision can be taken on their case. They just stay in the asylum system. Even if they've come here unlawfully for economic reasons and should be returned to their home country, they won't be, because the law doesn't work. Only a small minority might ever have been sent to Rwanda. Everyone else stays indefinitely in taxpayer-funded accommodation and support. Now, the Home Office estimate that around 40% of asylum cases since March of 2023 should be covered by these Illegal Migration Act conditions. The remaining 60%, under the previous government's policy, should still have been processed and cleared in the normal way. However, even though previous ministers introduced this new law 12 months ago, they didn't ever introduce an effective operational way for the Home Office to distinguish between the cases covered by the Illegal Migration Act and the other cases where decisions should continue, between the 40% and the 60%. So as a result, decisions can't be taken on any of them. I have been shocked to discover that the Home Office has effectively stopped making the majority of asylum decisions. Thousands of asylum caseworkers cannot do their proper job, and as a result, the backlog of asylum cases is now going up. It is the most extraordinary policy I have ever seen. We have inherited Asylum Hotel California. People arrive in the asylum system and they never leave. The previous government's policy was effectively an amnesty, and that is the wrong thing to do. And it isn't just bad policy, it's also completely unaffordable. The cost of this indefinitely rising asylum backlog in hotel and accommodation support bills is astronomical. The potential costs of asylum support over the next 4 years, if we continue down this track, could be an eye-watering £30 to £40 billion. That is double the annual police budget for England and Wales. Mr. Speaker, this newly elected government is not prepared to let this chaos continue. So let me turn to the action we are urgently taking to restore some grip to the system, to tackle the chaos and to get costs down. First, I have informed the Rwandan government we will be ending the Migration and Economic Development Partnership. We will save £220 million on further direct payments to Rwanda over the next few years, and we will immediately save up to £750 million that had been put aside by the previous government to cover the MEDP this year. Second, we will invest some of the saved money from the Migration Partnership into a new Border Security Command instead. It will bring together the work of the Border Force, the National Crime Agency, the Small Boats Operational Command, intelligence and security officers. The recruitment has begun for a new commander, and we will put in place additional cross-border officers, investigators, prosecutors, intelligence and security officers, with new counter-terror-style powers against organised immigration crime announced in the King's speech last week. We're immediately increasing UK officers' involvement in Europol and the European Migrant Smuggling Centre. And third, we will replace the Rwanda Migration Partnership with a serious returns and enforcement programme. We have immediately replaced the flight planning for Rwanda with actual flights to return people who have no right to stay to their home countries instead. We're immediately redeploying Home Office staff away from the failed Rwanda partnership and into returns and enforcement to reverse the collapse in removals that has taken place since 2010, and I have tasked the Immigration Enforcement Team with intensifying enforcement activity this summer, targeting illegal working across high-risk sectors. Fourth, we will end the asylum chaos and start taking asylum decisions again so we can clear the backlog and end asylum hotels. The new Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill announced in the King's Speech will bring in new replacement arrangements, including fast-track decisions and returns to safe countries. But in the meantime, I am laying a statutory instrument which ends the retrospective nature of the Illegal Migration Act provisions so that the Home Office can immediately start clearing cases from after March 2023. Mr. Speaker, making this one simple change will save the taxpayer an estimated £7 billion over the next 10 years. And fifth, as the Prime Minister has just set out, we will work closely with our European neighbours to tackle the upstream causes of migration, including through the Rome process. Mr. Speaker, this country will always do our bit alongside others to help those fleeing war and persecution. But we need a proper system where rules are enforced. There are no quick fixes to the chaos created over the last 14 years, and it will take time to clear the asylum backlog, to bring costs down, to get new enforcement in place, to strengthen our borders and prevent dangerous boat crossings. But there is no alternative to serious, hard graft. We cannot waste any more time or money on gimmicks. The country voted for change, and that means it is time for a sensible and serious plan. I commend this statement to the House.
Just say a very important statement, and it ran over slightly, so I'm more than happy for the front bench spokespersons also to run over if need be. Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and I welcome you back to your place, my first opportunity to do so. In my time both as Home Secretary and indeed before that as Foreign Secretary, you were very kind to me, my minor indiscretions at the dispatch box, late deployment of statements and slight overrunnings. As you know, you've also been very, very kind to my family in sometimes quite trying circumstances, and I very much appreciate that. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate the Right Honourable Lady on her appointment as Home Secretary. It is a challenging but incredibly rewarding job, and I genuinely, because the security of this nation is now very much in the hands of her and her ministers, I genuinely wish her all the success in everything she is looking to do. And I know she inherits in the Home Office a dedicated team of civil servants who will help her keep the country safe and secure. They did that to me when I was in her position. I'd also like to take this opportunity, of course, it's disorderly to recognise their presence, but if I were to wave my hand vaguely in this direction, I might also take the opportunity to thank my previous private office civil servants. It says here, I want to thank the Home Secretary and her team for advance sight of the statement. I just put a line through that. The Labour Party and indeed the Home Secretary in her statement like to talk tough on border security, but today's statement, despite all the hyperbole and the made-up numbers, is basically an admission of what we knew all along, is that the Labour Party have scrapped the Rwanda partnership on ideological grounds, removed a deterrent which the National Crime Agency said that we needed, and the level of discourtesy directed towards the people and government of Rwanda is quite breathtaking. To have them read about this decision in the papers before anyone from government had the good grace to formally notify them, I think, is an error. And no one in this House believes for a moment that that level of discourtesy would have happened had this partnership been with a European country. Labour has given an effective amnesty to thousands of asylum seekers who are banned under Conservative plans. And Labour's plans amount to doing less than we were doing when we were in government and merely changing the signs above a few desks at the Home Office with their so-called border command and their returns unit. Before the election, the Right Honourable Lady said that she would create a returns unit. Now, the narrative is that she is going to redeploy some staff, not increase the number of staff, redeploy some staff, showing that the returns function already exists. And the fact there is now no safe third country to return people to who cannot be returned home means that we ask, where is she going to send the people who come here from countries like Afghanistan or Iran, in Syria? Has she started negotiations on returns agreements with the Taliban or the Ayatollahs of Iran or Assad in Syria? And if she's not going to send anyone that arrives here on small boats to Rwanda, which local authorities will she be sending people to? We were closing hotels when I was in government, and I wonder which local authorities will be receiving those asylum seekers. If not Rwanda, will it be Rochdale or Romford or Richmond? And most importantly, can the Right Honourable Lady now confirm that if you arrive here illegally in a small boat, you will be able to claim asylum? And finally, will she confirm how long after she briefed the media that she was scrapping the partnership with Rwanda did she have the courtesy to speak directly with the Rwandan government? And it is because we now have no deterrent that nobody wants to take on the role of the head of her new so-called border command. Neil Basu, former senior police officer, a man who I have huge respect for, was Labour's #1 choice. He's ruled himself out. And we now learn that General Stuart Skeets, again, a very highly respected former British Army general who was in large part responsible for delivering the Albania deal, which cut small boat arrivals by 90% from that country, has resigned from his position as Director of Strategic Operations. To misquote Oscar Wilde, to lose one border commander could be seen as a misfortune. To lose two looks like carelessness, perhaps even incompetence. I also notice, and it's available online for those who are thinking of applying, that the new job advert for Labour's Border Security Command is located not in Kent, where the channel is, but is flexible from Belfast, Bristol, Cardiff, Durham, Glasgow, Liverpool or Manchester, none of which, the last time I checked, are anywhere near the English Channel. The reality is, everybody knows, including the people smugglers, that the small boat problem is going to get worse. Indeed, has already got worse under Labour because they have no deterrent. People are being sold a lie when they are being smuggled into this country across the busiest shipping lanes. And we do need to stop them. Too many lives have already been lost. Sadly, 6 more have been lost in the Channel in the last few weeks, and our hearts go out to them and their loved ones. We disagree on many things, but we can agree that we need to put an end to this evil trade. But sadly, the initial decisions that her government has made this problem worse and not better.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the words that the Shadow Home Secretary gave about the dedication of Home Office officials and also the importance of work on national security. As he will know, when I was in the shadows, I always worked with him and supported him around national security issues. I know he will do the same as well, and I welcome him to his shadow post as well. I presume this was the first of the Conservative leadership speeches, contest speeches that we have heard today. Let me just respond to some of the things that the Shadow Home Secretary has said. Look, you realise, let's all be very clear, what it is we have inherited from him and from his party. We've had the highest level of spring crossings ever. Yeah. That is what has happened under his party. We've had gangs left to wreak havoc, not just along the French coast, but across our border, through our country and back through Europe as well. We've got asylum supports costs set to rise to £30 to £40 billion over the next 4 years as a result of his decisions and his party. And as for this idea about deterrent, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry. 4 volunteers being sent to Rwanda isn't a deterrent to anyone for anything at all. And the idea that he would spend £10 billion on this fantasy, this fiction, this gimmick, rather than ever do the hard graft. I think £700 million has already been spent on sending just 4 volunteers in 2.5 years. Now, we had often warned that it would frankly be cheaper to put them up in the Paris Ritz. Frankly, it turns out, it would actually be cheaper to buy the Paris Ritz. And as for the amnesties, I don't know if he has ever understood the Illegal Migration Act that he voted for and then he inherited from his predecessors, because when he asks what happens to people who arrive illegally and can they claim asylum, that is exactly what happens under Section 9 of his Illegal Migration Act. They can all claim asylum and they can all enter the asylum system and will be entitled to asylum support. That is what happens. That is the system that he's been presiding over and running since he became Home Secretary. That is the system that we have now inherited. The problem is people enter the asylum system and they never ever leave. He didn't even bring in the operational arrangements to try and properly take decisions, and his Home Office effectively stopped taking the majority of asylum decisions in May. Maybe he didn't even know, but that is what's happened in his Home Office. Mr. Speaker, this party and this government doesn't believe in amnesties. We think the rules need to be respected and enforced. His party is the one who has actually given an effective amnesty to people who can stay in the asylum system forever. We believe the rules should be enforced. The problem is, actually, that is what the Shadow Home Secretary believes too. I don't think he believes any of the stuff that he said. He's only saying it for his Tory leadership contest. He's just too weak to tell his party the truth. He thought the whole policy on Rwanda was batshit, and then he went out to bat for it. It's just not serious.
I bet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend to her place and thank her for her statement. I think we all suspected that policy in the Home Office under the last government was a bit of a mess. I don't think we realised how much of an expensive mess it was till she's provided that in her statement. Just ask the Home Secretary about the attraction for people coming here illegally to work in the black economy. If there are suspicions, then you have to go to HMRC, the Gang Masters Authority, UK Visas and the police to get action to deal with those activities. I note that the Home Secretary is looking to try and combine them now to deal with illegal working in the car washing sector. Is that going to be a systematic change of approach, and is it going to be applied to other sectors as well? I think it's very welcome if it is.
Well, my honourable friend is right. We have to tackle the illegal working and also the exploitation that can often drive a lot of what happens, and that is why we are intensifying the immigration enforcement, part of our new huge expansion in reforms in returns and enforcement unit as part of our plans. But he is right that the process also needs to be simplified because it has become too complicated and too bureaucratic actually to just make sure that the rules are being enforced. We have set out high-risk sectors that we want to focus on this summer, but we need a more systematic approach. We have talked about a single enforcement approach, and we will set out more details about those plans.
We now come to Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Foord.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the year 2018, the number of small boat arrivals stood at 299. In the year 2023, last year, the number was over 29,000. What happened in those intervening 5 years? One thing that happened in those intervening 5 years was the closure of the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. The Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme was introduced by the coalition government in 2014 and was designed to select some of the most vulnerable people from refugee camps in Jordan near Syria. And what we've seen since the closure of that scheme is people choosing instead to make for these shores rather than applying in refugee camps. So, will she rule out the offshore processing of asylum seekers? Or will she consider introducing a scheme similar to the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme that could serve to incentivise asylum seekers applying for asylum close to the war zones that are afflicting them?
Can I welcome the honourable member to his post speaking on these issues? He's right to talk about the importance of the UK doing its bit to help those who have fled persecution and conflict. It's why I strongly believe that the Homes for Ukraine programme was immensely important. It's been important personally to our family. It's why I think it's been so important that the UK has done its bit in previous years as well, including around Hong Kong and Afghanistan as well. And that must continue to be the case. It has to be alongside a properly functioning system, though. Otherwise, criminal gangs will continue to exploit whatever the system is, and at the moment, those criminal gangs are getting away with it. On the specific issue around offshore processing, in fact, the Vulnerable Persons Scheme was a form of offshore processing, just as the Homes for Ukraine scheme was. So I think there are different ways of having arrangements in place, and our approach is to always look at what works. So long as it meets proper standards in terms of international law, we should be serious about what it is that works in order to tackle the complex problems that we face.
Joani Reid.
My right honourable friend for her statement. I think that my constituents will be incredulous when they're informed of the extent to which the previous government has wasted so much money on this scheme. What commitments can you give the House that for any further programmes and the money that will be spent, that we'll be able to rescind our commitment on those and that no further public money will be wasted?
Well, my honourable friend makes a really important point, and I welcome her to Parliament as well as to asking questions on this issue. We have to have a really strong and rigorous and robust approach to value for money. And that has to be in every department. That cannot simply be the responsibility of the Treasury. It has to be the responsibility of the Home Office, the responsibility of every government department. That is the approach that this Labour government will take. I am frankly shocked that not just the Home Office, but actually also the Treasury, the Prime Minister, Cabinet colleagues under the last government all signed off these incredibly high payments and costs. They must have had the modelling that would tell them how much these costs would go up by, and yet they signed it off. Our government is determined to pursue value for money at every stage.
Kit Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If numbers of small boat crossings next summer are higher than this summer, will she resign?
I realise the honourable member is keen to get rid of me before I've even just stood up at the dispatch box. Unfortunately, I think we have seen a succession of Conservative Home Secretaries who, 8 I think we have had in the last 8 years, none of whom resigned, 2 of whom were sacked. Actually, that was 2 of the same person who were in fact sacked under the last government. Look, we have to be serious about this. We have to be serious about this because the dangerous boat crossings are undermining border security and they are putting lives at risk. Nobody should be making those journeys, and we have to work not just here but also across other European countries as well to stop boats before they reach the French coast in the first place, and to make sure that lives can be saved and that the gangs are actually accountable for their terrible crimes.
Josh Simons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement on the shocking figures that are symbolic of the failure of the members opposite to restore control over our borders. I note that despite this spending of taxpayer cash, removals of failed asylum seekers collapsed and foreign national offenders collapsed under the Conservatives. Can I ask the Home Secretary what the Home Office is doing to ensure that those who've no right to be in the UK are swiftly removed and the rules are properly enforced?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. I also welcome him to his seat in Parliament as well. He is right that the removals of failed asylum seekers have fallen by a third Since 2010, the removals of foreign national offenders have fallen by a quarter. That is not good enough. It means the rules are not being respected, the rules are not being enforced. And it's why we will set up a new returns and enforcement programme. We have committed to 1,000 additional staff to be working on returns and enforcement to make sure that the rules are in fact respected, to make sure that not only where we have return agreements in place, but also looking at individual cases as well, to make sure that we can have a system that people have confidence in. There is a lot of chaos to tackle, but we are determined to do it.
Pete Wishart.
Speaker, the Home Secretary is absolutely right to lay it into the Conservatives for their shambles of an immigration policy that will define them in years to come. But all I'm hearing from the Home Secretary is being harder on asylum seekers. Enforcement seems to be the priority of this Home Secretary now. Where are we hearing about the safe and legal routes that asylum seekers have access to come to this country? And will she stop the dehumanising and scapegoating language? And will she pledge to take no quarter from the belligerents behind me?
Yeah. I thank the honourable member for his question. I think, as I responded to the Liberal Democrats, making sure that the UK always does its bit to help those who have fled persecution is really important. And we have done so through different programmes in the past. We had the Syrian Families programme back in 2015, which was also important. But we also have to make sure that the system works, that it has credibility, and that the rules are enforced. And too often the rules aren't enforced at the moment, and they need to be, so that everyone can respect the system. And also too often we have criminal gangs who are just causing havoc, who are able to undermine border security, and who are also making huge profits. It's become a criminal industry along our border, and that is deeply damaging. I do agree with him that this cannot be about rhetoric, and nobody should be just ramping up the rhetoric, especially when it's alongside just gimmicks that don't work. What we've got to do is be serious. We've got to be serious about this and actually put in place sensible plans that work.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the Home Secretary, the Labour Home Secretary, to her place. We've inherited an almighty mess with asylum accommodation costing £8 million per day. It's absolute chaos. And it seems that, according to the Sunday Times, there's even middlemen and middlewomen taking advantage and profiteering through this system. How is the Home Secretary going to get a grip of this chaos that we've inherited from the previous Tory government?
My honourable friend raises an important question, because as well as failing to tackle the criminal gangs taking hold along the Channel, there's also been too much of a focus on gimmicks, and also a failure to have practical planning in place. So the failure, for example, to make sure that they had proper long-term contracts around asylum accommodation, and instead, when we had the chaos at Manston a couple of years ago, that then led to last-minute hotel procurement, completely inappropriate accommodation, and also costing a fortune as well. So we have to tackle that, and that is why we have set out plans. We're determined to make sure that we can get that backlog down, and also end asylum hotel use. As a result of the chaos with the Illegal Migration Act and the fact that the Home Office has stopped taking decisions, that will now take time. That is going to be difficult to take time to sort that out, but that's why the statutory instrument that we're laying today is so important. That alone should save the taxpayer £7 billion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Labour Party managed to go an entire election campaign without answering this question, and that the Home Secretary failed to answer it again when asked by the Shadow Home Secretary, so I'll give it one more try. Where does the Home Secretary intend to send failed asylum seekers from Afghanistan, Syria and Iran?
Again, I'll just say to the honourable member, he obviously doesn't understand the system that his party and his government put in place. All the people who are in the asylum system, they're staying there. So they're staying currently under his policies. For those individuals are now being sent all around the country into asylum hotels all over the country. That is the system that they have left us with. We don't think That is the right thing to do. We think that asylum decisions should be taken on a case-by-case basis. That is the right thing to do, and also that we should make sure that we have proper returns agreements, and to do what his party should have been doing under his own policies for the 60% of people who continued to be entitled to asylum decisions but weren't actually getting them under his Illegal Migration Act. So what we will do is run the asylum system effectively, like actually his system should have been doing.
Rachel Mastold.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend for the forensic work that she's been doing in her department. Could I ask her what consideration she has given for a humanitarian visa for people in Gaza to be reunited with their family if they're studying in the UK or working in our NHS? My constituent has his wife and 2 little children in Gaza at the moment. He can't return home, and yet the last government refused to make provision for them to come and be reunited with him in the UK.
Well, my honourable friend will know that there are obviously long-standing arrangements for family reunion for refugees, and obviously there are also different concerns that have been raised around Gaza, because there's a real importance for people being able to return to their homes as well in the Middle East too. But if she has an individual case that she would like to raise with my right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, then she's very welcome to do so.
The Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, when I was in the migrant camps in northern France last year, the migrants told me and some of my colleagues that one of the deterrents that would stop them coming is if they were turned back in the Channel or sent back the same day. Now, we saw the Border Force Agency take a boatload back just last week. So will the Home Secretary now, with that advice, grow a political backbone and order the Border Force to send the boats back the same day?
Well, the honourable member refers to the case where there was an incident in the Channel and where there was cooperation between the Border Force and between the French authorities that did also involve returning people to the French coast. That operational cooperation, I think, is really important. But I would just say to him, cooperation is the really important word here, because if we want to prevent gangs operating and organising, if we want to prevent boats reaching the French coast in the first place, we have to work closely not just with France, but with Germany, with other European countries, with the countries through which some of the supply chains are operating as well. And it's that cooperation that I know quite often he and some of the others in his party have refused. So that cooperation will be important, and it's our best way to stop the criminal gangs.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just a few short days, my right honourable friend has simultaneously saved the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money and got more people in the Home Office working on getting this system sorted than we have had in the years that have gone before. So I kind of congratulate her for that. Does she agree with me that it's entirely in keeping with Labour values to ensure that there's safe refuge for those fleeing a war zone, and at the same time to ensure that those who aren't entitled to be here are repatriated and save the UK taxpayers money?
Well, my honourable friend is right. There are just some principles here about doing our bit to help those who fled persecution, but also making sure that those who have not, the rules are enforced, and that people who don't have a right to be here should be swiftly returned. So at the moment, none of those things apply. None of those things are working properly, and that's why we have to restore order to the asylum system so that we can go back to some of the principles that, if you go back many years, the UK has always stood for.
Colin Denyer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a huge relief that the vile Rwanda scheme has been scrapped, and I've listened very carefully to the Home Secretary's statement. Now, given that 94% of people seeking asylum in this country are ready and eager to work to support themselves, and given that freezing them out of work leaves them in destitution, but also means that the UK misses out on tax revenue from their work and misses out on much-needed specialists and professionals like the nurse I met in an asylum seeker project in Bristol recently, will the Home Secretary take the UNHCR's advice and urgently lift the ban that stops asylum seekers from working?
No, I don't believe that that is the right approach, because what we need to do is to make swift decisions and make sure that the rules are properly respected and enforced. I am concerned about employers who exploit those who have arrived sometimes as a result of criminal gangs, sometimes as a result of trafficking, sometimes as a result of smuggling. I don't believe that employers should be able to exploit those kinds of routes and journeys. Once, if people have fled persecution, if they are granted asylum in this country, then of course they should be able to work and be able to work swiftly. But if they are not entitled to be here, if they have not fled persecution, if they should be turned down and returned to their home country, then they should not be able to work in the UK.
Mike Tapp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Dover and Deal take this very seriously, being at the very front line of this issue after the Conservatives have left us with open borders. My right honourable friend, thank you for dealing with this with such seriousness. How long will it take for the Border Security Commander to be in place? And when they are, what sort of impact will they have in assisting law enforcement?
So can I thank my honourable friend, welcome to him to his position, and as the honourable member for Dover, I know his constituency has faced some of the real pressures as a result of the criminal gangs and the small boat crossings. I thank him for his work, and I know also his experience in tackling some of these issues, and he knows very well the work of the National Crime Agency, for example, in tackling these criminal gangs. The Border Security Command, we are putting in place the steps for the Border Security Command straight away. So we have already begun the recruitment, not just for the new commander, but also for additional staff, for hundreds of additional cross-border police, security and intelligence officers and specialist investigators and prosecutors. That work will start straight away. We have already immediately increased the UK presence in Europol and also in the European Migrant Smuggling Centre as well, so that we can get on with that work, building those partnerships and taking that action.
Reid Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Home Secretary agrees with me that it is a moral issue in terms of we must never again see people dying in the Channel. But does she agree with me that deterrent must be a part of the panoply that we put forward? So I'm not clear, what deterrent measures is the Home Secretary going to put in place? And because this question has been failed to be answered a number of times, what will happen to failed asylum seekers from countries like Syria, Iran and Afghanistan?
So, the honourable member, I agree with him that it is just devastating that lives are being lost, including children. And we've seen increasing violence from some of the gangs crowding more people onto these overcrowded boats, where a little 7-year-old girl ended up losing her life. But he talks about the issue about deterrence. The problem with the Rwanda scheme is it's clearly not a deterrent at all. 4 people being sent over 2.5 years, that is not a deterrent at all. The issue then is that at the moment as well, there are no deterrents for any of the criminal gangs at all. They can just operate with impunity. So you have to start by making sure that the criminal gangs actually can face justice, that there is actually the action on the supply chains earlier on, and make sure that we have consequences and that there is a deterrent there. I would also say that the problem is, I think, when you have a system where people can arrive in the UK and stay in the asylum accommodation system forever, which is the Illegal Migration Act that his party voted for, that also actually means there is no disincentive for anyone, because actually it makes it very easy for people, even if they have no right to be here, to be able to stay indefinitely, to be able to work illegally, and that goes against the rules and means the system is just not working.
Adam Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Home Secretary for her statement today, which I think contains some really quite revelatory points on the state of finances. Now, Sandy Acre in my constituency is home, and long has been home, to 2 of the asylum hotels, one of which I was very pleased to see recently closed. But the Best Western Hotel remains open, and this is a huge cost to people in my constituency and across the nation, and indeed leaves asylum seekers caught in an endless and inescapable limbo that they cannot get out of. What steps will the Home Secretary be taking to make sure that we can close asylum hotels once and for all?
Well, My honourable friend makes a really important point, and we need to clear the backlog, not just let the backlog grow and grow and grow, which is what the Conservatives were doing, but actually to end up clearing the backlog so that, as a result of that, we can end asylum hotels, which are inappropriate and extremely costly. I am concerned that, having discovered that the Home Office had effectively stopped taking the majority of asylum decisions under the Shadow Home Secretary, who doesn't seem to actually know what his own department was doing as a result of his own policies, as a result, that will now take longer to do, but it remains an immensely important thing that we have to do. The other thing we will have to do is to tackle the backlog that they had allowed to grow in the appeals process as well, which is also slowing the system down.
Brian Matthew.
Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the Home Secretary on her appointment and also on her statement to the House. Will asylum seekers, and this is following on, but perhaps with a nuance, will asylum seekers, perhaps after initial registration, be allowed to work and pay taxes while their applications are pending? Thank you.
Well, I think that if people have a right to be in the UK, so if they have fled persecution and have been granted refugee status, if they have come to be here on a visa through the normal processes, then of course we have people contributing to our country and have done so for generations. But I do also think that if people are not here lawfully, who have not fled persecution and actually should fail the asylum system process and be returned, then they should not be working in the UK. So I think this is simply about having a swift system so you can make decisions quickly and make sure that the rules are enforced.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm delighted to see my right honourable friend in her place on the government benches. I'm proud that Bradford is a city of sanctuary and of organisations like Bevan Health, set up by a GP in my constituency, that works to deliver healthcare, vital healthcare, to asylum seekers who are awaiting decisions, sometimes over 12 months in many cases, in hotels. So can my right honourable friend provide assurance that asylum seekers will continue to have access to essential healthcare as our government works to clear the asylum backlog, so in future fewer people will be left languishing in hotels? Thank you.
Well, Manfred is right that it's really important that we do try and swiftly clear the backlog as rapidly as possible. It does include some people who are very vulnerable and who may be in need of support. It also includes people who shouldn't be in the UK, and the system should work to operate fairly so they are swiftly returned. But we have to actually get back to decision making. You know, I thought I would be coming to this dispatch box and saying, well, what we want to do is we want to speed up decision-making, we want to accelerate decision-making. I didn't think I would be standing at this dispatch box saying, no, we've got to just restart asylum decision-making in the first place because they've just stopped it. I mean, that I really had not expected. I mean, it really is far more shocking than I had imagined, and I really thought I had a good imagination.
Richard Trice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you take a drug dealer off the street corner, guess what? Another one appears because of the vile drugs trade and the amount of money involved. My constituents of Boston and Skegness believe it's exactly the same with trying your policy, Home Secretary, of smashing the gangs. If you smash one gang, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Another one appear, and another one will appear, because there is so much money involved. Here's the point. How long will you give your policy, Home Secretary, before realising that the only policy will work is the policy that you actually started last week, which is to pick up and take back to France, which we're entitled to do under international maritime law? It will help British citizens, it will help the British taxpayers, and it will help the French, and it will reduce the magnet factor.
Well, what I would say to the honourable member is that no one should be making these dangerous journeys, and the criminal gangs are making massive profits from organising these boats. I just don't think they should be able to get away with it, and they are. at the moment. We should be taking action against those criminal gangs, and I simply don't accept that it's impossible to go after the criminal gangs to make sure that you take action not just on the gangs themselves, but also on their supply chains, on the routes in which the boats that are taking, on their finances, and that we properly, substantially increase the law enforcement resources. As honourable members will know, we have had cases where journalists have identified the smugglers and those responsible for being involved in some of the smuggler gangs. I think that those smuggler gang members should be facing law enforcement. We have to do this. It's essential that we do. This is about properly standing up for the rule of law, as well as making sure that we do everything we can to prevent these dangerous small boats.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to see the Home Secretary take her place. My constituents in Aylesbury have two concerns. First, that we re-establish control of our borders. Second, that we remember the need for compassion for vulnerable people fleeing conflict and persecution. On that point, will the Home Secretary commit to ensuring there are resettlement routes for people fleeing desperate and dangerous circumstances? And what will she do to ensure that they are viable? Thank you.
I think the my honourable friend is right to welcome her to her place in this House. That what I think people have always wanted in this country is that combination to have strong border security and to have a proper, fair system. So we do our bit to help those who have fled persecution alongside other countries, but also so the rules are enforced and those who don't have a right to be here should be returned. She will know that, for example, there are a series of different resettlement routes or different forms of support. For example, the Homes for Ukraine scheme, which does continue, and also some of the Afghan resettlement schemes. We are concerned about the operation of some of the Afghan schemes, and we are looking at that further to make sure that they are functioning properly.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The tragedy of desperate people dying in the Channel is compounded by desperate people dying in the Mediterranean and in the Aegean, as human beings fleeing from all kinds of horrible situations try to seek a place of safety. Is she cooperating with other European countries on a safe route for asylum seekers? Is she prepared to look in a much more humane way at the desperate situation that people face as they're trying to just get out of human rights abuses and wars around the world?
So, the honourable member makes a really important point about actually what is happening in the Mediterranean, about the pressures that we have seen, and also the fact, as the Prime Minister said in his statement, that we have seen not just conflict, wars, persecution, but also some of the impact of climate change as well, also making people travel and can sometimes lead to people making dangerous journeys. We should be working to prevent those dangerous journeys in the first place and prevent the need for those dangerous journeys, and that is why the UK government and the Prime Minister announced last week, as part of the European Political Community Summit, that we would invest over £80 million alongside work with other European countries, also as part of the Rome process, both to tackle some of the wider criminal gang networks that still operate in the Mediterranean, but also to make sure that we address some of those sources and the injustices and the serious crises that can lead to people making dangerous journeys in the first place.
Jonathan Blash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I warmly welcome my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, to her place. One of the consequences of the collapse in our asylum system over the last few years has been the increasing and intolerable pressure on local communities, something my constituents in Hartlepool raise with me time and time again. Can I ask the Home Secretary to outline how the steps that she's taking will begin to reduce that pressure on communities like Hartlepool?
Well, can I welcome my honourable friend to his post? I think there is a real challenge from the way in which this sort of chaotic way the asylum system has been run, that has led to a last-minute procurement of hotels that have ended up being in a chaotic system, ended up being extremely costly, And so actually everybody loses out from spending billions of pounds on this system, but also local authorities often not having time to work either with communities or with accommodation providers to make sure that things were managed in the right way. I will recognise, I think, the fact that we've got this problem where asylum decisions stopped being taken does mean that there's going to be some challenges now in getting that system working again, and that will mean it will take longer than we had initially anticipated to bring the backlog down. But we are determined to do this. It is the only way to get back to having a functioning system that really everybody should be able to support across the country.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Home Secretary to her place, wish her well for the future, and thank her very much for the very helpful and confident answers that the Honourable Lady has given. Home Secretary, there is of course a glaring issue regarding border security much closer to home, and that is the Northern Ireland Republic of Ireland border. This border was patrolled by the Republic of Ireland officials, and understandably so, as their right to protect their nation is paramount. However, this also made clear that the Good Friday Agreement does not preclude the need to exert checks on the border. Home Secretary, what discussions have been had with the PSNI and security forces in Northern Ireland to ensure that the open border with the Republic of Ireland does not become a free route to UK immigration?
Yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure to get my first question from the front dispatch box from the Honourable Member. I look forward to very many more. He, of course, raises important issues. Of course, the border issues, of course, between Northern Ireland and Ireland are, of course, different. We have different arrangements, rightly so, that reflect our long-shared history. But we also have very close cooperation, and we have close policing cooperation, we have close information sharing, we do have additional information sharing that isn't currently possible under the arrangements we've inherited with other European countries, and I think it's really important that those information sharing arrangements continue, and hopefully we can build on them with other European partners as well.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I share her astonishment at the scale of the mismanagement of the asylum system by the previous government. My constituency in Colchester has hosted many asylum seekers and indeed refugees over the years. We're a city of sanctuary. Our local authorities have played a full part in supporting that work. But may I ask the Home Secretary, will she confirm that those local authorities will be fully engaged in work going forward to ensure we've got more effective support systems? Thank you.
My honourable friend is right to raise the importance of working closely with local authorities. We are determined to do that. My right honourable friend, the Immigration Minister, already has work in chain looking at how we can better have work and cooperation between the Home Office and the local authorities. And it is also important to recognise that really through very many generations, refugees have come to this country and have contributed to our economy, to society, and been a hugely important part of that. It is partly because it's so important that we have that history that it's also so crucial to get the whole system functioning again instead of the chaos that we've got at the moment, which just undermines everybody's confidence.
Oliver Ryan.
I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. The people of Burnley, Padiham and Briarfield want to see these crossings stopped and these gangs smashed, and will welcome her tough action today. Because of the previous government's complete failure to control our borders, they spent millions of pounds a week on asylum hotels. What will she do to speed up the processing of people in those hotels and end their use?
We have to do all of these things, Mr. Speaker. We have to, and I welcome the honourable member to Parliament too. We have to have the action on the criminal gangs who are exploiting the situation in the first place, and that does involve much stronger cooperation with other European colleagues. And that it must include the new counter-terror powers that will be in the new legislation as part of the King's speech to strengthen the powers against organised immigration crime. But alongside, we've also just got to get the basics right. We've actually got to start taking decisions again, as well as speeding up the asylum decisions and making the system work again.
That completes that statement. Let the front benches change over.